Do you know that some of us are more predisposed to trauma than other people? I know, sounds crazy, but let me explain why and why methylation is at the core of that. And for those of us who are predisposed to trauma, why a B vitamin actually may be the worst thing that we can take. Now, you've all heard of being at risk for certain diseases, like being at risk for diabetes, right? You have a higher chance. You are predisposed. You are more at risk of developing diabetes. Well, the same is possible for experiencing life trauma. You can be more predisposed to experiencing burnout, trauma, PTSD, whatever it is for you, because the effects on the nervous system are a trauma. In this video, I'm going to go over which category of people are actually more at risk for trauma, why a B vitamin would be the worst thing for them to take, and why methylation is at the very core of this conversation. All right, who are more at risk of experiencing trauma? Trauma is actually an epigenetic condition, not a genetic condition. Genetics refer to actually what's your DNA. Epigenetics is how your DNA is expressed. What parts of your DNA are read, what parts of your DNA are silenced. So when we talk about epigenetics, we're talking about methylation. Methylation is the placement of carbon groups on your DNA. Think of Hansel and Gretel as they're walking down this trail and they're leaving breadcrumbs. That's kind of how you can think of methylation. On our DNA, it's a long trail of DNA bases. And methyl groups are placed along that trail, just like crumbs. These crumbs, these methyl groups, tell the birds, proteins, which parts of the trail to land on and actually make proteins. Proteins then become, of course, everything that we are, everything that we do. So how our DNA is read is based on where those crumbs are, those methyl groups, and so where the actual expression of the DNA into proteins happens. There are two ways that methylation imbalances will make you more at risk for experiencing life trauma. One way is if by your environment, even in utero environment, you are an undermethylator, which means that you have low serotonin activity and low dopamine activity. In those who are undermethylators, they experience life more traumatically than other people. Stressors are overwhelming to them. They're not just healthy stress, they actually overwhelm them and cause a level of change to the nervous system that is experienced as a trauma. Undermethylators struggle with burnout, with depression, with anxiety, along with a number of other traits. And so those who are undermethylators are predisposed, are at higher risk for experiencing trauma. So you can either be an undermethylator from early childhood based on different events that may have happened even as early as in utero, or this may happen later in life. And what happens in epigenetic conditions is that it really is based on the amount of oxidative stress that happens on the DNA level. And when it reaches a threshold for too much oxidative stress than what the body can keep up with, that's where it flips that switch and methylation changes happen. And so you can be going along fine in life and an event happens, even a physical event like a car accident, some other injury, something that really pushes your body over the edge in terms of its ability to manage the oxidative stress that is happening. And when that happens, then it makes this epigenetic change and your methylation status has changed. So I'm going to talk about the methylation piece, and then I'll come back to why B vitamins might be the worst thing for you. The methylation, notice that I did not mention specific genes in the methylation cycle. Methylation is an epigenetic condition, and so this can change in a person's lifetime. Whereas if you look at the MTHFR genes, and there are two common variants in the MTHFR gene, which are commonly referred to as methylation imbalances, those are going to be the DNA, the actual DNA expression of that protein, which means that when you have what are called SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms in those genes, the actual MTHFR gene or protein has less function. In fact, if you have one of those two common variants, which is the C677T and the A1298C. Those are the two common variants. And depending on whether you have just one gene or two genes that have those variants, it will affect the degree to which it alters the activity of that MTHFR protein. Now, that protein is right in the middle of the methylation cycle. It is an important protein. And that MTHFR gene is actually what breaks down homocysteine to methionine and makes the folate turn into the SAM, which is the S-adenosylmethionine. The S-adenosylmethionine is the methyl donor for the DNA, which means that it's going to be leaving those crumbs, those methyl groups, those carbon groups on our DNA. So when we talk about an epigenetic change and actual changing the amount of methyl groups or carbon cycles on our DNA, that is who is doing that. It's the S-adenosylmethionine or SAM. So these two variants are important in the overall scheme of the methylation cycle. However, they are not going to be enough to decide if you or someone else is an undermethylator because of epigenetic reasons. So it will not be enough to just test your SNPs through 23andMe like I did at first in order to see if you have a methylation imbalance. We really need to look at both the symptoms, and there are tests that we can do to look at your methylation status. When it comes to mental health and mood, undermethylation, overmethylation, methylation balances becomes really important. Why? Because when those methyl groups are put on the DNA, it changes the expression, the activity of these neurotransmitters like the serotonin, like the dopamine, like GABA. And these are key brain chemicals, nervous system chemicals that regulate our mood and emotions. When these get off, you become more prone, more at risk of experiencing stress and life trauma. So why might a B vitamin then be the worst thing that you could possibly take? Many B vitamins contain folic acid. Now, if you are up on methylation, you are guessing that I'm going to say that folic acid is the wrong thing to take and you need to take methylfolate if you have a methylation imbalance. I am not going to be saying that. Here is what you need to understand about B vitamins. When it comes to the methylation, when it comes to undermethylation, and its effects on decreasing the activity of serotonin and dopamine in your brain, you need to understand that any form of folic acid, including methylfolate, will also decrease the activity of serotonin in your brain. Let me say that again, because that's really important. Many people are going to therapy. Many people are working on having more energy. They're more health conscious. They're trying to get better. And so they take a B vitamin. And it ends up being the worst thing for them and really sets them back while in therapy. And this is the reason why, because the folate, or if they decide to take methylfolate because they think they have a methylation imbalance based on their genetics and their 23andMe tests, they are actually further decreasing the activity of serotonin in their brain. So if you are in therapy, if you are recovering from trauma, if you are one that you feel that experiences more stress and overwhelm, you should check your methylation status. And I hope that I have explained that this is not done through actually checking your genetics, those SNPs, those variants of the MTHFR gene. You actually need to look at the overall methylation status on your DNA so that you can know the effects that it has on your serotonin and dopamine levels, because that is really what matters most when you are working on recovering from trauma or in therapy and with any form of mood challenges. In the links below in the notes, I have put a link where you can purchase and you can actually order the test that you would do for checking your methylation status and knowing whether you are an undermethylator or an overmethylator. And if you are an undermethylator, a B vitamin that contains folic acid or methylfolate, any form of folic acid, would be the worst thing that you could do for yourself. I'm Dr. Aimie, and I am here sharing with you tools and supplements to help you accelerate your healing journey from trauma.